My parents secretly gave my younger sister access to the $192,000 investment account I had spent years building for my own future. When my mom finally told me, she didn't apologize. She just looked across the kitchen table and said, "She needs the money more than you do." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't even ask what they had done. I just smiled and said, "Okay." They thought that meant I had accepted it. They had no idea that 3 days earlier, I had already made a decision about that account. And if they had known what I'd done, I don't think my mother would have been sitting there looking so confident. The weirdest part is that I wasn't calm because I wasn't hurt. I was calm because, for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to fight my family for permission to protect myself. I grew up in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio, in a family where money was always discussed but somehow never quite discussed honestly. My parents weren't poor. They weren't wealthy either. Dad owned a small HVAC company with 2 employees, and Mom worked part-time at a dental office after my sister was born. We had a comfortable house, reliable cars, and enough money for normal things. But there was always this feeling that money belonged to whoever needed it most at that exact moment, and somehow that person was almost never me. I'm 29 now, and my younger sister Chloe is 24. Growing up, Chloe wasn't exactly spoiled in the obvious way. She wasn't walking around with designer bags or demanding a new car every year. She was just rescued, constantly. If she forgot to pay a bill, Dad helped. If she quit a job, Mom told everyone she was figuring things out. If she got herself into debt, someone quietly paid part of it. If I had a problem, I was usually told to make a plan. That difference didn't bother me much when we were kids. When I was 16 and Chloe was 11, I thought it was normal that I babysat her while my parents worked. When I was 18 and saving for college, I thought it was normal that my parents couldn't help, because money was tight. When Chloe was 18, Mom helped her buy a used SUV. That one bothered me. But I still didn't say anything. I had gotten good at telling myself that I didn't need what she got. I worked throughout college. I waited tables. I tutored freshmen in statistics. I worked summer jobs and took extra shifts during breaks. I graduated with student loans, but I didn't have nearly as much debt as some of my friends because I had been saving from the time I was 19. My investment account started almost by accident. A financial advisor at my first full-time job gave a presentation about retirement accounts and long-term investing. Most of the people in the room ignored him. I didn't. I was 22, making $47,000 a year, and terrified of ever being financially dependent on anyone. I started small, $200 a month, then $300. Whenever I got a raise, I increased the contribution. Whenever I received a bonus, I put part of it in. I learned about index funds, diversification, compound growth, and tax-advantaged accounts. I wasn't trying to get rich. I wanted options. That was the word I used in my head. Options. The option to leave a bad job. The option to buy a home. The option to handle an emergency without calling my parents. The option to know that if life suddenly changed, I wouldn't have to beg anyone for help. By the time I was 27, the account had passed $150,000. By 28, it was approaching $190,000. I didn't tell my family the exact number. That turned out to be one of the smartest things I'd ever done. They knew I invested. They knew I saved. They knew I was good with money. But I never gave them the balance. That changed the first time Chloe asked me for a loan. She was 23. She had gotten engaged, moved into an apartment with her fiancé, and decided she wanted to start a photography business. She needed $12,000 for equipment. "It's an investment," she told me over dinner. I said, "I believe you. Could you lend it to me?" I nearly choked on my water. "Chloe, I don't have $12,000 sitting around." She looked at Mom. Mom looked at Dad. Nobody said anything. Then Mom said, "You have that investment account." I looked at her. "How do you know about that?" "You've talked about it." "I've never told you how much is in it." I didn't say I knew how much was in it. It was a small moment, probably forgettable to anyone else. But I remember it, because something in the way she said it made me uncomfortable. I told Chloe, no, she wasn't happy. Dad said I was being too rigid. I asked him what he would do if he had $12,000 saved for retirement, and his daughter wanted to start a business. He said, if I believed in her, I'd help. I said, then you should help. He didn't answer. Instead, he asked why I was acting like my sister was a stranger. That became a pattern. Whenever I said no, someone reminded me that Chloe was family. Nobody seemed to notice that I was family too. A year later, Chloe's photography business didn't work out. She had made some money, lost some money, and eventually stopped doing it. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't even bring up the $12,000. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. 6 months later, Chloe had credit card debt. Then she had a medical bill. Then she needed money for a security deposit after moving again. Each time, my parents helped. And each time, the conversation eventually turned toward me. You're in a better position. You don't have kids. You have investments. You can rebuild. That last one bothered me more than anything. Because it assumed my money was somehow less important, simply because I had managed not to spend it. The $192,000 represented years of saying no to myself. It represented vacations I didn't take, restaurants I skipped, cars I kept driving long after I could have upgraded. It represented every time I looked at something I wanted and thought, maybe later. And somehow my family's interpretation was that because I had been disciplined, I could afford to be generous. I should have realized then that they weren't asking me anymore. They were starting to feel entitled to what I had built. The first truly strange thing happened 3 months before the conversation about the account. I came home from work one evening and found Mom sitting at my kitchen table. She had a key because she had been feeding my cat while I was out of town. Hey, I said. She smiled. Busy day? Pretty long. She watched me put my bag down. Then she asked, have you thought about buying a house? I laughed. Every day. You could afford one now. Maybe eventually. You could use some of your investments. I stopped. What? Not all of it. I know. You don't need to keep so much locked away. I looked at her. Why are you suddenly concerned about my investments? She shrugged. I'm your mother. That answer should have been comforting. It wasn't. A few weeks later, Dad asked me a similar question. Then Chloe. 3 different conversations. 3 different people. All about my money. I didn't tell them the account had recently crossed $192,000. I didn't even tell them it had reached 6 figures. I started keeping my financial information completely to myself. Then, one afternoon, I got a text from Chloe. Can we talk? I replied, yes. She called. She sounded nervous. What's going on? I need help. With what? Mom and Dad are going to tell you something. My stomach tightened. What? I don't know how to explain it. Try. She was quiet. Then she said, they're going to ask you to let me use your account. I sat down. What? I don't want them to. That surprised me. Then why are they asking? Because they think you're the only person who can fix this. Fix what? She didn't answer. Chloe? I owe money. How much? I don't know. I rubbed my forehead. Okay, we can talk about it. No. Her voice was different. Don't help me. What? Please don't. I heard something in the background. A door closing. Then Chloe whispered. Mom doesn't know I'm telling you this. Before I could respond, she hung up. I sat there staring at my phone. That conversation didn't make sense. If Chloe wanted money, why was she warning me? And why had she sounded afraid? 2 days later, Mom invited me over for dinner. Dad was there. Chloe was there. Nobody touched their food. I knew immediately. Mom folded her hands on the table. We need to talk about something. I looked at Chloe. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Dad cleared his throat. Your sister is going through a difficult situation. I almost smiled. Of course she was. What kind of situation? She has some financial obligations coming due. How much? Mom answered. Enough that she could lose her apartment. I looked at Chloe. Is that true? She nodded. Okay. Mom reached across the table. You have money available. I didn't say anything. Dad added, we're not asking you to give her everything. What are you asking? Mom looked at me. We think you should let Chloe have access to the investment account. There it was. Not a loan. Not a request for help. Access. I looked at Dad. What exactly does that mean? It means she can use what she needs. How much? Mom said, we'll figure that out. I laughed once. You'll figure it out? She frowned. Don't make this difficult. I haven't. You're in a much better position than she is. I know. She needs the money more than you do. I looked at Chloe. She finally met my eyes. There was something in her expression that I couldn't understand. Fear, not greed. Fear. I looked back at Mom. You've already decided. Mom's face softened. We're your parents. That was when I understood. They weren't asking for permission. They believed they had some moral authority over the money because I was their daughter. Maybe they thought everything I'd built still belonged, in some invisible way, to the family. Maybe they thought being responsible meant I had volunteered to become everyone's safety net. I looked at the three of them. Mom waiting. Dad watching me. Chloe looking like she wanted to disappear. And I said the only word that came to mind. Okay. Mom blinked. Okay? I nodded. Okay? She smiled. Dad leaned back in his chair. The tension disappeared almost instantly. Mom reached over and touched my hand. I knew you'd understand. I smiled. Of course. Chloe looked at me. For a second, our eyes met. She looked even more frightened. I didn't understand why. Not yet. They thought they had won. They thought I'd surrendered. They thought the account was still sitting there exactly as it had been for years, waiting for them to decide how much of it my sister deserved. I let them believe that. Because 3 days earlier, I had made a phone call of my own. And I hadn't told a single member of my family. Not Mom. Not Dad. Not Chloe. And definitely not Ethan, my fiancé. I had finally realized something that should have been obvious years earlier. The question wasn't whether my family could take my money. The question was whether they still had access to it. That afternoon before dinner, I had met with the financial institution handling the account. I had asked them a very specific question. What happens if someone else has information about my account and tries to make a withdrawal or transfer? The representative had answered carefully. Unless they're an authorized owner or have the proper authorization, they can't simply access your funds. I had asked about beneficiaries. I had asked about account ownership. I had asked about old paperwork my parents might still have. And then, I had made one decision. I moved the account into a structure that gave me complete control over what happened next. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell Chloe. I didn't even tell Ethan. The paperwork was already processing. But there was one final step I had to complete before the change became effective. And as I sat at that dinner table listening to my mother explain how my sister needed my $192,000 more than I did, I realized something else. My family thought the money was still theirs to negotiate. They had no idea that by the time Mom finished that sentence, the person who actually controlled what happened to those dollars was no longer willing to ask them for permission. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced down. It was an email from the financial institution. The subject line was, "Action required, ownership change pending." I didn't open it at the table. I simply locked my phone and smiled. Because whatever my parents had planned for my $192,000, they were about to discover that they had made one very important mistake. They had mistaken my silence for surrender. I kept my face neutral until I was back in my car. Then I closed the door, locked it, and finally opened the email. Action required, ownership change pending. For a second, I just stared at it. Then, I read the first line. The account transfer I had requested 3 days earlier was ready for my final confirmation. That was it. That was the decision I had been keeping to myself. I hadn't given my parents access to the $192,000 account. I had done the opposite. I had removed the family from the equation entirely. 3 days earlier, after Chloe's strange phone call warning me not to help her, I had made an appointment with the financial institution that held my investment account. I told the representative I wanted to review the account structure, beneficiaries, and authorized access. I didn't want anyone else making decisions about my money. I also wanted the account separated from anything my parents had ever been involved with. There was an old family emergency authorization attached to some of my financial paperwork from when I was younger. It didn't give my parents ownership of my investments, but it was enough to make me uncomfortable. So I asked for everything to be reviewed. The representative explained what could and couldn't be changed, what paperwork was required, and what would happen before anything became final. No magic, no loophole, no dramatic disappearing of money, just paperwork, verification, and me finally taking responsibility for my own finances. I signed the documents. The $192,000 remained mine. The investment account stayed intact. I changed the authorized information where appropriate, updated the beneficiaries, and made sure future decisions couldn't be made based on some outdated family arrangement. And then, I did something else. I didn't tell anyone, not because I wanted to trick my family, because I wanted to see what they were actually asking for. If they genuinely needed help, there were ways to have that conversation. But if they believed they were entitled to my account, I needed to know that too. So when Mom looked me in the eyes and said Chloe needed my money more than I did, I already knew something she didn't. There was nothing left for her to authorize. The money was still there, but it was under my control. I confirmed the email that night. The changes were completed. Then I went home and waited. The next morning, Mom called. "Did you sleep okay?" I almost laughed. "Yes." "Good. I was worried you might be upset about yesterday." "I've had time to think." "And? I understand what you were trying to do." She sounded relieved. "I knew you would." I didn't correct her. She continued. "We're going to need to get the paperwork handled soon." "What paperwork?" "The access for Chloe." I sat at my kitchen table. "Mom, what exactly did you think I agreed to yesterday?" She hesitated. "You said okay." "I did." "So?" "So I said okay to having the conversation." "That isn't what you made it sound like." "I know." There was silence. Then her voice became sharper. "Are you changing your mind?" "No." "You just said." "I'm not changing my mind." "Then what are you saying?" I took a breath. "I'm saying I never agreed to give Chloe access to my investment account." Mom went completely quiet. Then she said, "You don't understand how serious her situation is." "I understand." "No, you don't." "Then explain it." "She owes money." "How much?" She didn't answer. "Mom?" "It's complicated." "Then why are you asking me for $192,000? "We're not asking for all of it." "You said she needed it more than I did." "I meant that she needs help." "Then help her." "We've already done everything we can." I leaned back. "Apparently not." Mom's voice softened again. "You have enough." There it was. The phrase I'd heard my entire adult life. You have enough. As if having enough meant I owed the excess to everyone around me. "I worked for that money," I said. "So did we." "No, Mom, you didn't." She went silent. I wasn't angry. That surprised me. I had expected anger. Instead, I felt tired. "You raised me," I said, "and I'm grateful for that. But you didn't build that account. You didn't make those contributions. You didn't sit at work at 22 and decide whether you could afford another $200 that month. I did." Mom's voice cracked slightly. "We're family." "I know. Family helps each other." "I agree." "Then, why are you acting like this?" "Because helping someone is a choice." I paused. "Giving them control over something I spent years building is not the same thing." She hung up. I knew then that this wasn't over. That afternoon Dad called. He didn't start with anger. He started with disappointment. "I thought you were going to help your sister." "I did too." "What happened?" I realized helping Chloe and giving her access to my investment account aren't the same thing. "She needs stability." "Then we should talk about what she actually needs." Dad sighed. "You're making this complicated." "No. I'm making it specific." He was quiet. Then he asked, "Did you change the account?" I didn't answer immediately. How do you know about that? Your mother told me you might be doing something. I smiled sadly. Of course she had. Yes, I said. I changed it. What does that mean? It means I control my own account. You always did. Then why did everyone think Chloe could be given access? Dad didn't answer. That was the first time I heard uncertainty in his voice. I'll talk to your mother, he said. Please do. He hung up. I thought that would be the end of it for a while. It wasn't. That evening, Chloe showed up at my apartment. I opened the door and immediately knew she had been crying. Can I come in? Yeah. She sat on the couch. I brought her water. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, I didn't ask them to do this. I know. She looked at me. You do. You warned me. She nodded. I didn't know what else to do. What happened? She looked down at her hands. I owe more money than I told Mom and Dad. How much? She swallowed. About 28,000. I sat across from her. Chloe, I know. Is it credit cards? Some. Loans? Some. She looked embarrassed. I made a mess. I believed her. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't pretending. She looked like someone who had finally run out of ways to hide a problem. Why did they think my account was the answer? Because Dad said you could spare it. I stared at her. He said that? He said you had almost $200,000 and no kids and no house payment. I shook my head. Chloe's eyes filled again. I told them it wasn't right. Then why did you let them plan it? Because they said you'd say yes. I didn't know what to say to that. They've always said you would help me. I looked away. There it was. The family story. The version of me everyone had created. The responsible daughter. The financially secure daughter. The one who could absorb everyone else's mistakes. I thought you were angry at me, I said. I am. That surprised me. She wiped her eyes. Not because you won't give me the money. Then why? Because I feel like I have to compete with you. I stared at her. She continued. Mom and Dad always tell me I'm not like you. You're disciplined. You're careful. You're successful. And I'm the one who needs help. Chloe. I know that's not your fault. She looked at me. But sometimes I hate hearing about how well you're doing. That hurt. But at least it was honest. I never wanted you to feel that way. I know. And I don't want you to lose your apartment. I don't either. Then let's figure out the actual problem. She looked suspicious. You're not giving me the money? No. Her face fell. But I'm willing to help you make a plan. She nodded slowly. That was the first real conversation we'd had about money without Mom and Dad sitting between us. And it made me realize something. Chloe wasn't the person I needed to punish. She had made bad decisions. She had hidden things. She had allowed our parents to believe she deserved access to my money. But she wasn't the one who had built the entire expectation that my success belonged to everyone. That was my parents. The next morning, I got another email from the financial institution. It confirmed that the ownership and authorization changes were complete. I saved it. Then I printed a copy. I had a feeling I'd need it. That evening, my parents asked me to come over. I almost didn't go. But I decided I wanted the conversation to happen face to face. When I arrived, Mom was sitting at the kitchen table. Dad was beside her. Chloe was there too. Nobody offered me food. That told me enough. Mom slid a folder toward me. This is what we need you to sign. I didn't open it. What is it? Authorization paperwork. For Chloe? Yes. I looked at Dad. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I opened the folder. The paperwork wasn't giving Chloe ownership of the entire account, but it would have allowed access to funds. Enough access that, once money started moving, getting it back could have become a completely different problem. I closed the folder. No. Mom blinked. What? No. She stared at me. You don't even want to discuss it? We've discussed it. No, we haven't. Yes, we have. You said okay. I said okay, because I wanted to see what you were actually asking me to do. Dad finally looked at me. Megan, I love you, I said. Both of you. Mom's expression softened. But that doesn't mean you get to decide what happens to my money. We're not trying to control you. I pointed at the folder. You brought me paperwork to give my sister access to an account that has $192,000 in it. Mom looked frustrated. She needs it. I understand that. She could lose everything. I understand that, too. Then why won't you help her? Because I don't believe the answer to her financial problems is giving her the money I've spent years saving. Mom shook her head. You've become so selfish. The room went quiet. I expected that word to hurt. Instead, it clarified everything. I was waiting for you to say that. Mom looked confused. Why? Because that's what you've always called boundaries. Dad looked down. I continued. When I wouldn't loan Chloe $12,000, I was selfish. When I wouldn't pay her bills, I was selfish. When I said I needed my own savings, I was selfish. My voice remained steady. And now, because I won't hand over $192,000, I'm selfish again. Mom's face changed. We're your parents. I know. And we know what's best. No. That was the first time I had ever said it to her. No, you don't. She stared at me. I opened my bag and placed the printed confirmation on the table. This is the account change. Dad picked it up. He read it slowly. Then his eyes widened. You already did this? Yes. When? 3 days ago. Mom looked at me. You planned this before we talked? Yes. Her confidence disappeared. You knew? I knew you were going to ask me for money. You knew? Chloe warned me. Mom turned toward Chloe. Chloe immediately said, I didn't tell her everything. Mom's face tightened. You went behind our backs. Chloe shook her head. No, I told her because I didn't want her money. That stopped everyone. Dad sat back. Mom looked at Chloe for several seconds, then she turned to me. You knew all along. I knew enough. And you still said okay. Yes. Why? I looked at her. Because I wanted to hear you say it. What? That she needed my money more than I did. Mom's eyes filled with tears. I didn't mean it that way. You did. No. You've been saying some version of it for years. She looked down. Dad quietly said, She's right. Mom turned toward him. Don't, but Dad continued. We taught her to be responsible, then punished her for succeeding. Nobody spoke. That sentence stayed in the room. Finally, Dad looked at me. I'm sorry. I wasn't expecting it. I nodded. Thank you. Mom wiped her face. What happens now? I answered honestly. I don't know. That was the truth. I didn't know if our relationship would ever feel normal again. I didn't know whether I could trust them with financial information. I didn't know whether I wanted to. But I knew one thing. The account wasn't going anywhere. The $192,000 stayed invested under my control. I didn't withdraw it to prove a point. I didn't spend it recklessly. I didn't move it somewhere mysterious. I simply protected it. And I helped Chloe in a different way. We sat down together and listed everything she owed. She negotiated payment arrangements where she could. She cut unnecessary expenses. She picked up additional freelance work. I helped her build a budget. I offered to cover one small emergency expense myself, but only after we agreed exactly what it was and why. Not because she was entitled to it, because I wanted to help my sister. There was a difference. My parents didn't immediately accept that. Mom stopped talking to me for almost 3 weeks. Dad checked in occasionally. Chloe and I slowly started rebuilding our relationship without letting our parents manage it. A few months later, Chloe paid off the first of her credit cards. She texted me a picture of the zero balance. Under it, she wrote, I did it myself. I smiled. I wrote back, I'm proud of you. And I meant it. As for my parents, things remained complicated. Mom eventually apologized. Not perfectly. She still said she thought she had been protecting Chloe, but she admitted that she had treated my financial independence as something the family could negotiate. Dad admitted something similar. He said he had been proud of my discipline, but had slowly started assuming that because I was capable, I could always carry more. I told them capability wasn't consent. That became a phrase we returned to more than once. I didn't cut them out completely, but I stopped sharing account balances. I stopped explaining every financial decision. And I stopped feeling guilty when I said no. The biggest change wasn't the account, it was me. For years, I had believed being a good daughter meant making myself useful. If I could solve the problem, I thought I should. If I had more money, I thought I should give more. If my sister was struggling, I thought I should sacrifice something. But there is a difference between generosity and obligation. Generosity is something you choose. Obligation is something someone else decides for you. My $192,000 didn't magically make me selfish. It gave me the freedom to stop being afraid of disappointing people. And ironically, once I stopped treating my family like they were entitled to everything I had built, I became more willing to help them in ways that actually made sense. I didn't give Chloe $192,000. I helped her learn how to manage the $28,000 problem she'd created. She eventually got herself out of it, and that mattered more than simply writing a check. A year after that dinner, I sat down with my parents again. Mom looked at me and said, "I still remember what I told you that night. She needs the money more than you do?" She nodded. "I shouldn't have said it. I thought about it. You were wrong." "I know." She reached across the table. "I was measuring your needs by what I could see." I nodded. "I understand." She squeezed my hand. "I don't want to lose you over money." "You won't. But things have to be different." They are. And they were. Not perfect, but different. I still have the same $192,000 account. It's grown since then, although I don't think about the number the way I used to. Because the most valuable thing I got from that experience wasn't financial. It was the realization that protecting something I worked hard for doesn't make me a bad daughter, a bad sister, or a selfish person. The night my mother told me Chloe needed my money more than I did, she thought she was defining who deserved what. Instead, she accidentally taught me something I should have learned much earlier. My family's needs can matter to me without becoming my responsibility. And when I finally understood that, saying no stopped feeling like rejection. It started feeling like ownership. Not ownership of the money. Ownership of my own life.